Hey friends, welcome to the third webinar in the Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy webinar series. My name is Sydney Chaifetz. I use she, her pronouns, and I work as the Assistant Director of Student Development Programs here within the Safe Campuses Initiative at SAFE Project. So a little bit more on SAFE Project. SAFE is a national nonprofit organization. We work to stop the addiction fatality epidemic. We do this through our four main initiatives: safe communities, safe campuses, safe workplaces, and safe veterans. Simply for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into detail of what each initiative does, but I strongly encourage you to check out our website to learn more at safeproject.us. You can learn more about us there, and you can also get involved. Today, though, in particular, we're here on behalf of the Safe Campuses Initiative. So at Safe Project, the campuses team is dedicated to cultivating college and university communities that are built on student wellness. We work alongside students and staff to foster supportive and empowered environments that promote mental health, recovery, and holistic well-being. We partner with passionate campus stakeholders to redesign systems and to fill gaps. We offer free consulting and program and training programs. We offer student development programs, harm reduction programming, and other customizable solutions tailored to the needs of your campus. Tonight, though, we are here on behalf of the Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy, so welcome to our fellows. The CRLA is an academic year-long fellowship opportunity for students that are in recovery and also recovery allies to be an essential part of the solution to solving the addiction and mental health epidemic in the United States. So again, please check out our website, safeproject.us, to learn more and to consider applying for next year's Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy cohort. A little bit of housekeeping before we officially jump in. Please do continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know your name, what institution or university you're here with us today, maybe one thing that you're excited to learn here today. As far as questions and answers, I'm sure tonight's conversation is going to generate a lot of questions. So please use the Q&A feature and we will hold space for all of that at the end. Please, though, use the chat feature to continue to engage with each other. Also, Dylan has a lot of engaging questions for us, so please use the chat feature to contribute to the discussion. So let's jump into the webinar. Tonight, I am particularly excited to introduce this evening's speaker on turning off autopilot, a paradigmatic approach to rethinking addiction and recovery. Tonight's speaker is my co-assistant director and also a dear friend. Please help me in welcoming Dylan Dunn.
Hello. Yeah, we're going to jump right into it because we have quite a bit for about 40 or 53 minutes left. As Sid said, please engage throughout. I always joke that it's hard to distract me when I'm talking, but I would love to see you all in the chat discussing things, but also we'll have some polls throughout. So if you're kind of passively watching, please know that there's going to be some points of engagement. But as we get started, please, if you can, either find a scrap of paper and a writing utensil or open a blank document on your computer so you can participate along with the tool we're going to use. Kind of our outline for today. First, the goals. We're going to talk about are the 4 paradigms model that we talk about a lot on our team. We're going to do that via a survey. We're going to reflect on your survey results about what your paradigm or your approach is. We're going to consider applications for collaboration, service, and professional development. And so just the outline of the session will be, we're going to do some introductions. We're going to go through the survey or inventory. That's where you're going to have a blank piece of paper or a document open. There's going to be 32 questions, so have a pretty long list there. We're going to go through what the survey means and what a paradigm is. We'll talk about the results, and then we're going to go through some examples of what this means, why it's important, and then do some Q&A if we have time. So who am I? As Sid said, I'm also on the Safe Campuses team. Some of you met me at the Leadership Academy Summit. My pronouns are he, him, his. I mostly work with professionals doing this work, so I see some of you all in the chat. I do kind of consulting with campuses looking to change the systems on behalf of their students. I'm from Ohio. I live in Colorado right now. You see me in Denver. My email is on the page right here if you have any questions that you want to chat about afterwards, or you just want to say hi or set up a meeting. Always glad to. And then please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. We're going to jump in to this survey. So as I said, for the third time now, grab a scrap sheet of paper or open a blank document on your computer, and then number that sheet or that document numbers 1 through 32. There's going to be 32 questions, and we're going to go through them very quickly. The purpose of why we go quickly is so that we can not overthink things. I want you to, as we go through these, respond kind of in a knee-jerk reactive way thinking about the way just that you react, less about what you think is the correct answer or what you think you should say. This is a moment where you just got to be honest and say what comes to mind first. If we do have a question and you're really struggling with it, make a mark about it somehow, circle it, highlight it, whatever works best for you. And so we can either come back to that conversation or we can talk about why that may have been later. But the scale we're going to use, so to give you a bit of a preview, we're going to give you 4 questions at a time. You're going to read those questions and then rank each of the questions on a scale of 0 to 5. 0 being, I never agree with that statement, doesn't make any sense to me, to 5 being, this is something I believe all the time. There's a scale, of course, from 0 to 5. If you want to put a 3, put a 4, put a 2. The goal is to not put only 0s and 5s. That's not really how many of us make decisions, but do try to go quickly and focus less on the numbers, as 3 being radically different than 4, but there should be a difference between a 1 and a 4 on your scale, for example. So if we're ready, we're going to get started here. So if you have your numbers, again, 1 through 32, the first 4 questions are on your screen. I'm going to read them off. If that becomes not helpful or is distracting, feel free to let me know in the chat. But again, you're going to give every statement a 0 to 5 score. So question number 1 is, if our schools normalize making better decisions, we can prevent substance misuse. 0 meaning I never agree with this. 5 meaning this is kind of critical to who I am and what I do. Number 2, quality of recovery can be measured by the alleviation of substance use disorder symptoms. Again, quality of recovery can be measured by the alleviation of substance use disorder symptoms. Number 3, person-first language is useful as it helps us center the humanity of an individual over a diagnosis. If you don't know what person-first language means, that's okay. Maybe give it a 0. We'll come back to it later. But again, number 3 is person-first language is useful as it helps us center the humanity of an individual over a diagnosis. Number 4, our understanding of addiction is largely shaped by the judgments we make about drugs and people who use them. Again, our understanding of addiction is largely shaped by the judgments we make about drugs and the people who use them. Those are the first 4 questions. Moving on. Number 5, stigma is one of the most harmful aspects of substance use disorder. Again, stigma is one of the most harmful aspects of substance use disorder. Number 6, use of substances at an early age, before the brain is fully formed, is a clear cause of addiction. Use of substances at an early age, before the brain is fully formed, is a clear cause of addiction. Number 7, one of the most dangerous influences for a person with a substance use disorder is people who enable their addictive behaviors. Again, number 7, one of the most dangerous influences for a person with a substance use disorder is people who enable their addictive behaviors. Number 8, diagnosing someone with a substance use disorder is less important than helping someone define their personal relationship with substances. Diagnosing someone with a substance use disorder is less important than helping someone define their personal relationship with substances. On to the next 4. Number 9, our focus on alcohol and other drugs often serves as a barrier to truly addressing underlying needs. Our focus on alcohol and other drugs often serves as a barrier to truly addressing underlying needs. Number 10, our culture's hyper-normalization of substance misuse makes recovery more difficult than it needs to be. Again, our culture's hyper-normalization of substance misuse makes recovery more difficult than it needs to be. Number 11, addiction is a disease. Again, addiction is a disease. Number 12, recovery is a process of redemption and becoming a better person. Recovery is a process of redemption and becoming a better person. Moving forward. Number 13, it is critical that our schools do not tolerate individuals or groups who use drugs. It is critical that our schools do not tolerate individuals or groups who use drugs. Number 14, abstinence is an important first step in overcoming addiction. Abstinence is an important first step in overcoming addiction. Number 15, recovery pathways should be unique and tailored to each individual on their own terms. Recovery pathways should be unique and tailored to each individual on their own terms. Number 16, halfway there, stigma causes us to focus on social consequences of substance use rather than well-being and the deeper causes of addiction. Again, stigma causes us to focus on social consequences of substance use rather than well-being and deeper causes of addiction. Since we're halfway, Sid, if you want to put the link one more time in the chat, in case folks fall behind, in case you're stuck on a question, the link in the chat will have all the questions again. And so once we get through all 32, if you've missed one or two, you can go back to that link and look back to questions you may have missed. But don't do that yet. Keep following along with us. If you fall behind, just try to do your best to stay with where we're at, and then feel free to go back. Second half, number 17. Substance use disorder should be diagnosed by a medical or mental health professional. Substance use disorder should be diagnosed by a medical or mental health professional. Number 18. Oh my gosh, excuse me. If individuals knew more about substances, their use would decrease. If individuals knew more about substances, their use would decrease. Number 19, people with substance use disorder know what's best for them, even if it includes continued use. People with substance use disorder know what is best for them, even if it includes continued use. Number 20, there are fundamental differences between people with substance use disorder and those who can casually use substances. There are fundamental differences between people with substance use disorder and those who can casually use substances. Twelve to go. 21. Once someone develops an addiction, the addiction is part of them for the rest of their life. Once someone develops an addiction, the addiction is part of them for the rest of their life. 22. Societal norms and prejudice heavily influence how we decide who does or does not have substance use disorder. Societal norms and prejudice heavily influence how we decide who does or does not have substance use disorder. Number 23, no matter the cause of addiction, individuals are responsible for their own recovery. No matter the cause of addiction, individuals are responsible for their own recovery. Number 24, I struggle to fully trust someone when I learn that they use drugs. I struggle to fully trust someone when I learn that they use drugs. Number 25, Generalized approaches to treatment and recovery are very unlikely to be helpful. Generalized approaches to treatment and recovery are very unlikely to be helpful. Say it one more time. Generalized approaches to treatment and recovery are very unlikely to be helpful. Number 26, the perceived differences between illicit and prescription drugs are more indicative of stigma than science. The perceived differences between illicit and prescription drugs are more indicative of stigma than science. Number 27, when I know that someone uses drugs or has a substance use disorder, I find myself wondering, are they intoxicated, drunk, or high when I interact with them? When I know that someone uses drugs or has a substance use disorder, I find myself wondering, are they intoxicated, drunk, or high when I interact with them? Number 28, addiction must be viewed in relation to co-occurring mental health conditions and traumas. Addiction must be viewed in relation to co-occurring mental health conditions and traumas. 4 more. Number 29, one day we will discover a cure for addiction. One day we will discover a cure for addiction. Number 30, when I talk about a person struggling with substance use, I refer to them as a person with a substance use disorder. When I talk about a person struggling with substance use, I refer to them as a person with substance use disorder. Number 31, the ways we define addiction are deeply bound in social and cultural context. The ways we define addiction are deeply bound in social and cultural context. Number 32, our final question, approaches to treating addiction must be developed in ways that center the perspectives of those with lived experience. Approaches to treating addiction must be developed in ways that center the perspectives of those with lived experience. So those are all 32 questions. Again, if you got lost at one point, or I was talking too fast, or I was talking too slow and you fell asleep, feel free to use the link that Sydney has placed in the chat to catch up, to make sure you have 32 different scores from 0 to 5. We'll do some math here as we go. So the question, as people read the title to this session, is often, what even is a paradigm? Like, what is, I think paradigmatic is the word we use in the title. It's a fancy word. It's not actually that fancy, but it seems that way. But for now, as my dog sneezes, we're good. For now, we're going to hold on to our scores, and we're going to do a little bit of background conversation of what in the world is a paradigm. So for context, a paradigm is a framework containing the basic assumptions, ways of thinking, and methodology, so ways of doing, that are commonly accepted by members of a scientific community. It's also a cognitive framework shared by members of any discipline or group, or more informally, a general mental model or framework for anything. And so paradigms shape our how, so our general attitude and stance, the approaches that we see as valid in this conversation today in regards to recovery and substance use, our what, our actions and their associated outcomes, and then our why, so our motivations and our end goals. As we go through the paradigms, we're talking about 4 different paradigms today. Consider the pros, the cons, and where you see them in your work. So as we get started, and the poll will come up here in a second, I want you to answer a question for me. And this is one of the questions we just talked about. Addiction is either a condition, a disease, a disorder, or all of the above. I'll give you 20 seconds here. And Sydney, whenever you want, we'll show the results. Alrighty, all of the above. We got 27% disease, 0% condition, 7% disorder, 67% said all of the above. So I've got bad news, friends. We're going to do this again. Consider your answer to this question. The next poll, A, condition, B, disease, or C, disorder. All of the above is no longer an option once the poll comes up. So re-vote, but you can't pick D. What do we get? 13% condition after having 0 before, 53% disease, 33% disorder. Okay. The question being here is, what if you had to really choose? Often, many of us know this is complicated and we kind of think of it as all the above. Some of us are more focused on, yep, it's disease. I've heard that. This is what I believe. This is how I do my work. Some of us kind of land in different camps. Um, when we say all the above, the challenge is our brain, when moving quickly, doesn't really allow us to pick all the above as answers for things because we have to make decisions all day long. We have to write policy. We have to create flyers. We have to create t-shirts. We do a whole bunch of things that we have to make decisions about. And all the above is often too complicated for us to make a snap decision with. So we choose. And when we track beliefs and attitudes over time, we develop a structure to reflect on the addiction and recovery movement and our role in it. So today's conversation is about how we think about addiction matters. So on the right of the screen here, this is kind of what we're thinking about is if there are 4 paradigms that we'll talk about, we each have our own unique kind of shape that is our paradigm and the way that we think. So we're going to start going through these paradigms one by one. We're going to start with the moral paradigm. So the moral paradigm, as all of them, have some core tenets. First, the moral paradigm believes that addiction and substance use is rooted in individual and group moral failings, character defects, and or ignorance. The idea being, if you knew better, you'd do better, and therefore you would be better. Recovery is about taking responsibility and or making amends. The focus is on the individual and their role in the cause, alongside a focus on the impact on innocent bystanders. There's a condemnation of bad influences, and then ideally a society should have no addiction, according to the moral paradigm. What can happen here is that shame and threatening social connection or support can be utilized as a change motivator. So we're going to do some math here. We're going to start by calculating your moral paradigm. So questions 1, 7, 12, 13, 18, 23, 24, and 27. Again, if you need a reminder of which is which, Sydney put the link in the chat. It's still there. You're going to add your scores to all of the, I think there should be 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, those 8 questions, and you'll get a score out of 40. So I'm going to give you about a minute to do that. As we go through this, the goal is to not judge yourself. We'll have conversations later, but a lot of folks, it's easy to kind of get defensive as we start this exercise. We'll kind of make our way through that as we go. Okay, we're going to move on here. Keep doing your math if you need to. Again, if you need a reminder, this is also on the second page of that handout, I believe. The next paradigm is the disease or the medical paradigm. So the tenets of this one are as follows. Addiction is caused by physical, mental, or genetic deficiencies or abnormalities. A lot of big words there. People with substance use disorder are physically or chemically impaired. There's a focus on curing the problem, alleviating symptoms, or managing chronic issues, addiction as a pathology. So then you test it, you identify it, and then you treat it. Addiction and recovery are to be understood through the perspectives of those with medical or clinical expertise. So many of us will hear addiction is a disease, not a moral failing. So historically, the disease or medical model is kind of a response to the moral model. They don't necessarily override each other, but they do kind of rely on each other to exist at this point, and they are in response, or at least the disease or medical model is in response to the moral model. In response to the moral model, as I just said, this paradigm has been valuable for progress such as insurance coverage, the growth of the treatment industry, and as an approach to destigmatization. I know many folks go to treatment maybe for the first time and are told, hey, you have a disease. We're here. We can help you. And that can be a magical moment for folks and can really change the rest of their lives. And so this is important, as all of these paradigms are. The next slide is math. We're back to math. I'm going to make a timer this time. I'll give you 75 seconds to do this one. Maybe. 30 seconds left. 10 seconds. All righty, we're going to move on to the next paradigm. The next paradigm is a social one. The social paradigm, the tenets of this one are that environmental factors create let me restate this. Environmental factors create substance use disorder by, first, developing conditions for coping or escape, or enforcing norms or expectations. So the idea of what use is acceptable and what isn't. Obviously, many of us know that our cultures can value some substances over others. Substance use disorders are enforced through prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination. Inflexible policies and procedures create barriers to inclusion and pragmatic approaches to support. So kind of the inflexibility of the structures we have can keep us from making what seem to be kind of obvious changes. Substance use disorder is more indicative. So it communicates more of our problems with our society than individual problems. So substance use disorder is more of a social issue than an individual one. Substance use disorder is culturally defined and intertwined with questions of diversity and inclusion. This is also where we see a lot of conversation around person first language, meaning I would say a person with a substance use disorder, not a drug user or an addict. This is kind of like the legacy of the social paradigm is person first language. And then the real focus here is reacting to and dismantling stigma about people who use drugs and the drugs themselves. Math time. We're going to do 60 seconds on this one since we should have the hold of it by now. We'll do 60 seconds. Halfway, 30 seconds left. Ten more seconds. And the final paradigm, I believe, is the neurodiversity, also what we call the identity paradigm. So the tenets of this one are first that the relationship that individuals have with substance use can be incredibly complex and diverse. Labels serve to develop somewhat arbitrary groups and can be more accurately understood as spectrums. Substance use is not inherently pathological, negative, tragic, or unhealthy. Instead, it can be valuable when truly understood. Neuronormative standards and stigma about people who use drugs are what cause the most harm. So this idea that there are normal folks, people with regular brains, and people who don't, those kind of binaries cause harm according to this paradigm. And lastly, we need to listen to people with a relationship to addiction and or substance use to understand what well-being looks like for them. As you can see, the focus here is an empowerment of a positive self-identity where agency is the focus. So I'm going to help you make your own decisions. I'm going to help you understand yourself, where I see that as kind of the most valuable part of this work. Final math problem. We have the final 8 questions to add together. We're going to do one more minute. Once you finish this one in about 50 seconds, you'll have 4 scores, all less than 40, but it should be somewhere between 0 and 40 separately. Halfway. My dog is joining us on the camera. Hi, Banjo. 10 seconds. And like I said, you should have four numbers now, all of which are somewhere between 0 and 40. Label them by their paradigm. So you'll have the moral number, the disease number, the social number, and the identity number. And hold on to those for now. We're going to talk about those. And also, I do want to say we are going to now have 25 minutes to have not nearly enough discussion about this. That really today is to kind of inspire more. And so if you want to talk more, please connect with peers or folks you see in the audience, or feel free to schedule a meeting with any of our SAFE staff. We would love to have these conversations. We find a lot of our staff meetings or our team meetings devolve into paradigms discussions, or we refer to the word paradigms a lot. And so it's okay if we don't get closure on much today. That's kind of the point. So we're gonna have two polls here. The first question will be, what is your top paradigm? So what is your highest score? And the second question will be, what is your second highest score? We can't track you on any of these. We just want to see what the audience has. So don't be nervous if you're not quite sure if you like your answers. But as we submit those, it's important to know that very few, I don't think I've ever seen someone take this survey where they got a 0 on any of them. Very few people get 40s on any of them. So it's kind of explains, or at least shows, how complicated these results can be, which is truly the point of the survey. What do we got? Ooh. Okay, so the highest scored paradigm overall, we have a good spread. There's folks all over the place, right? And you will see that kind of throughout your days. When you're at work or when you're at school, folks will vary quite a bit. The highest scored two are identity and social. And then the second highest scored paradigms are also identity and social. But we do have folks whose highest scored paradigm is moral, and second highest is moral, and most highest is disease, and second highest is disease. Um, yeah, so the answer is, if we were a group and we were one collective person, the answer would be it's complicated. The fun part about what this all means is that, yes, it is complicated, and these paradigms can complement each other and they can contradict each other. They're often doing both at the same time, but we don't often have the conversations about what that means. So in the chat, if you would, just any initial reflections, thoughts, reactions to your experience of like what you noticed, what you were feeling. Was there anything surprising? Okay, surprised how high folks' score was for the moral paradigm. It's not uncommon. Yeah, Jessica, a lot of folks, like, we hear the disease model and because we often hear addiction is a disease and we kind of think that must be our dominant paradigm. But often the conversations are a bit more complicated than that, right? I know plenty of people who say and repeat often, kind of almost for pragmatic reasons, that addiction is a disease. And then I also hear them say many things that are more in the identity paradigm. Variations and complexities. Yeah, I think a lot of folks, especially when I've done this with professionals in a room where it's like half clinicians and half doctors, a lot of folks kind of get angry at the idea that all of these questions have multiple answers. And they dig their heels in quite a bit, which many of us know what it's like to work with those folks. It's not always easy. So we're gonna keep going. Feel free to keep throwing your thoughts in the chat. Another question, if you want to keep typing, is, do conflicts between any of the paradigms show up in your work or personal life? And so did any of this kind of strike you as reminding you of something that has either happened or is going on, or things that you've noticed as you work or as you go about life? one of the common answers we get here is that, especially folks that do substance use work for a living, that they feel like they have a paradigm at work and then also a separate paradigm at home. And for me, I work paradigm is a very well-defined oiled machine. But then when I go home, I find myself, I'm working with like my parents around substance use stuff or my family members when they struggle. It's a lot more, definitely a lot more moral paradigm when I'm working with people that I deeply, deeply rely on or that I've kind of struggled with for many, many years. Give it a minute or two for folks if they have more answers. I'm kind of surprised this was a private message. Oh yeah, a lot of folks are sending these just to host some panelists, so you all can't see the chat. But I promise you, messages are coming through. I'm kind of surprised at how high my moral paradigm was, but if I reflect back on how I saw and heard growing up about substance use, I'm not as surprised. Yeah, we all grew up the way we grew up, and a lot of us wish we just like woke up one day and unlearned a lot of things, but we don't, right? We still got to we got to live our lives with what we've got. While starting my project this year, I could feel the university's paradigm that they have always stuck by. Yeah, this whole project here, this survey came from, selfishly, I'll speak for myself, the arguments I used to have with folks I worked with. And I would always, when I was early in my career, have arguments constantly. And I would always be really frustrated and not know why. I would just be judging people. And then as I started working with more and more universities and working nationally, I found that it was actually more useful to navigate those disagreements or those tensions and make them work as opposed to just be mad all the time. I don't know about y'all, but I'm not a big fan of being mad all the time. And the last person here says conflicts come up all the time. The tension is timeline, trying to get them better, faster since I work in a school setting. Interesting. Okay, so we're actually going to dig into some of the more controversial questions. So we've done this survey with, I think we're well over 500 people now. And I've done some data analysis on the responses that we get. And so we're going to go through a bunch of questions. Maybe there's 5 here. You're going to respond to how you scored the question or how you would score the question when it's in front of you. And then we're going to just chat about the results. So first is the question, recovery is a process of redemption and becoming a better person. Give you about 20 seconds here. Just again, knee-jerk reaction, or if you just want to look at your score and put what you put, or put on the poll what you put down for your survey. Recovery is a process of redemption and becoming a better person. What do we got? A couple zeros. About half of you said 2, and then a quarter of you said 3, and 2 or 17% of you said 5. This is a really hard one, and I'll walk you through, I guess, what the purpose of this question was. Is it really focuses on the idea of better versus redemption, right? So someone must have been bad and can become good. And that has moral implications to it that informs our criminal justice system, that informs often our treatment systems. And we also hear this a lot within the rooms, right? Within meetings, or just the way we talk about recovery, is it's this redemption arc. And it's a beautiful thing, right? Yeah, Jonah's saying the better person piece, it can be so subjective. And some of us like to overthink that, and some of us just make that snap judgment the moment it comes up, right? Depends on how kind of what you were kind of socialized to think, at least in my brain, or just whatever word stuck out to you. And so I just say, yeah, think about like what are the implications of this for yourself. If you want to take notes and kind of think about this later as well, this is complicated, but it has really meaningful implications for how we treat folks who go on the recovery journey. The next question is, no matter the cause of addiction, individuals are responsible for their own recovery. This is another popular one among the recovery community. And again, these are the controversial questions. So these are ones that our data show that we have more people on the outsides than on the inside. And so a pretty wide variety of answers here. So don't be afraid if you have a 0 or 5 to answer that. And as we go through and as we wait for the results for this one, just think of how would you respond to someone who believed the opposite of you? How would you work with them? Or not just in a how would you manage their stupidity, more of how could you collaborate with them or work with them to better serve the folks you are working with. Yeah, so we had 0 zeros here. Everywhere else, we're just finely spread through, right? We have a couple three, or we have 30% threes, 30% twos, and then some ones, some fours, and some fives. Yep. So as Chrissy said, the second half of this, a lot of folks agree on. Yep, I'm responsible for myself. That is how I mean, personally, I love the idea of being responsible for myself because agency is super empowering for me. But the no matter the cause of addiction piece can also be hard to manage. And that can kind of, this question can feel almost dismissive sometimes. So it doesn't matter what you're talking about. It's all about you. You gotta be responsible for your own stuff. And so again, yeah, like two people who can believe, even two people can score the same on this question and score the same for different reasons. And so how do we use this question in our work, or how do we use this thought in our work? Do we use it in an empowering way? Do we use it in a dismissive way? I'm sure a lot of us can think of times where we've said, well, you're responsible for your own recovery, so make your own mistakes. Like, it's not my fault. And when we've used that same thought to say, I want to empower you to do what you got to do, friend, right? But again, that no matter the cause of addiction piece can be what sticks out to folks who tend to have more of a social or identity paradigm. That first piece can be even more important and override the last half. Alrighty. Again, be thinking, how would you collaborate with someone who disagreed with you on this? Third one, I think this is third. Abstinence is an important first step in overcoming addiction. Abstinence is an important first step in overcoming addiction. This is also one where folks feel like often commonly feel like a split between their personal beliefs and paradigm and what they've been told they should think or what they tend to talk about at work. This one is fascinating, truly. What do we got? A lot of twos. Almost half you said 2. Some of you said 0. Some of you said 5, and then a 1 in there. A couple ones in there. So yeah, a lot of more people kind of trending towards this is not my thing, but there are people who said, yeah, this is it. This is the central part of who I am and how I think about this work. And yeah, we all navigate that all the time when we do recovery work. Absence-based pathways are real. Of course they are, right? Like that's kind of often the foundation of the work of this field is often an absence-based approach. And then some of us have been kind of educated differently or have experienced differently the idea of multiple pathways, or that abstinence might not need to be the first step or a step, or a lot of variation here. And the question being, within the same cohort of student leaders this year, we have a variety, right? From 5s to 0s to 1s, and 2s and 3s and 4s in the middle. So yeah, we do recover, of course. The question then being, is abstinence recovery on its own? It also kind of comes up. Is someone in recovery because they stopped, right? Yep, abstinence isn't always the first step. Sometimes there are many more steps that lead up to that. Oh yeah. We talk about a lot in our recovery ally trainings or in our work that there are many pathways to recovery, and with that, many people will still, and it's okay. In our brains is still that abstinence will be step 1, and the multiple pathways can come from that, or that multiple pathways lead to abstinence. This is more about, yeah, again, how do you think first, and then what do you do with that? Next one is about diagnosis. This is a bit technical, I guess. But the question is diagnosing someone with a substance use disorder less important than helping someone define their personal relationship with substances? This is a bit of a dichotomy here. But again, diagnosing someone with substance use disorder is less important than helping someone define their personal relationship with substances. This often depends. Yeah, integrated is often the answer, Leandro, right? Um, is that you want to kind of do both, is figure out what does the diagnosis say, but also what is your approach, right? And this is kind of a value judgment of which comes first or which is more important. And so again, like kind of the challenge of all these questions today is that many of us want to answer all of the above for all of them, but we can't do that all day long. It's not really how the speed of the day allows us to react. But a lot of you did, yeah, put three kind of in the middle a little bit of, it's a mix of both. Of course it is, yeah. And then we got some zeros and some fives, a good spread here. And then Jessica says personal relationship relates to ACEs. Yeah. Um, and yeah, the ACEs, for those of you who aren't familiar, adverse childhood experiences. Who are you and why is substance use part of your life? Um, are you using for a reason? I believe many people are. Or are substances this thing that got a hold of you? Um, and what does diagnosis do? Is diagnosis a tool that we use? Is it the answer? What does it give you access to? Different ways of doing this work, and often different roles we play. We'll choose our answer to this question and how we interact with our colleagues. The final one here. This is our probably most controversial one, is the question: if our communities, workplaces, or schools in our case here today, if our schools normalize making better decisions, we can prevent substance misuse. If we normalize making better decisions, we can prevent substance misuse. All righty. Curious about what we're going to get here. Yeah, everywhere, everything but a five. You got some zeros, absolutely not. Some ones, a good bump in the middle with twos and threes, and then back down to 15%. So 15% for 0, 1, and 4, and then 31% for 3, 23% for 2. If folks would be willing to put some thoughts in the chat on this one, tell me more. Yeah, Jessica says this one's tough when talking about prevention education. If we normalize questions, yeah. So is it about educating and about telling people what they don't know, or is it about equipping them with the tools and the skills they need? Maybe, yeah. Maybe, and is that making better decisions? I don't know. Chrissy says this seems like magical thinking. Sure. Uh, Raising awareness, of course. I can see difficulty in community reaching a consensus of what defines making better decisions. Yeah, if like often better decisions, in this scope of this question, we kind of have to equate better decisions with not using or using less. Yep, Laura, great question. Who decides what is a better decision? Often people in power, right? And so if we are staff, as some of the folks that are chatting in this in the chat box are, we kind of sometimes get to make that decision, or the folks above us make that decision. Like, is this a moral question? Often, yes. Yeah, there's a lot to this, and that's why it's the most controversial question we have on the survey, most of the time at least. And so, yeah, it's complicated, and you will work with folks who agree with you, but more often you're going to work with folks who don't quite agree with you when it comes to this question, or don't agree as much as you do, or as less as you do. Again, like you're not going to be on the exact same page with this question. And so the point of this survey is, can we pause and have a really meaningful discussion here before we pretend to agree? Because there's often really cool nuggets of knowledge and nuggets of solution within those disagreements, or us not rushing to answers that might not actually solve the problem. So just as we wrap up here, we have about 6 minutes left. I'm going to go through kind of the conclusion of what the survey means. Again, we're just starting this. If you want to have more conversations, I really encourage you to. I would love to. I'm not going to debate folks because it's not the purpose of this tool, but I do love to sit and I kind of dig through the different parts of this. So just so you see the themes we have oh my gosh, the themes we have found so far in our testing. So the 5 sentiments agreed to the most are that person-first language is useful as it helps us center the humanity of an individual over a diagnosis. Stigma is one of the most harmful aspects of substance use disorder. Recovery pathways should be unique and tailored to each individual on their own terms. Addiction must be viewed in relation to co-occurring mental health conditions and traumas. And then approaches to treating addiction must be developed in ways that center the perspectives of those with lived experience. Okay, yeah, makes sense to me. What we found so far in terms of what is agreed to the least is that last question we talked about. It is critical that our communities or workplaces or schools do not tolerate individuals or groups who use drugs. But again, because it's agreed to the least, but still our most controversial question, that means there's a pretty radical split among the responses we get. Abstinence is an important first step in overcoming addiction, has surprisingly fallen to the agreed to the least grouping here of 32 questions. It's in the bottom 5. If individuals knew more about substances, their use would decrease. I maintain a level of skepticism about someone once I learn that they use drugs. And interestingly, the one here at the bottom of the slide is that one day we will discover a cure for addiction. If you've taken screenshots, this is an interesting slide to take some screenshots of and look more through. Jessica, we can make these available for sure. I'll have Sydney send out the slides on an email to the folks that signed up today. And just so you all know, if this is something you want to chat about as a team or with your university, we're more than glad to come and facilitate that if it'd be useful. We've done that in the past. So yeah, this is kind of our pulse on, again, what do folks seem to agree to the most currently, for better and for worse. Agree to the least, for better and for worse, are these 5. Yeah. And again, why do we believe these things? Why do we not believe these things is more important sometimes than what do we believe? Okay. The final thought I want to leave you with in terms of things to consider is how you can use your understanding of these paradigms to better manage collaborative partnerships. I wish we had more time to like fully discuss this, but some thoughts I'll just leave you with here is it's important to slow down. With a lot of the substance use work we do, there's a lot mixed into it. The history is incredibly complicated, and yet we still seem to be making the same mistakes over and over again when it comes to substance use and addiction and recovery. We did not get here because we had all the answers. And so, yeah, it's important to just slow down and even like think to yourself, how are your paradigms changing over time? If you find yourself really low on a paradigm, maybe ask someone, hey, do you have a resource that maybe leans more into this or helps explain this or why it's useful to you or to this group? And if you're really high on a paradigm, what is the best way you can utilize that for change and for good? Quick example of what that looks like. And so this is our paradigms in action slide, where we are going to talk about the way that disease and social paradigms, as kind of what we see often as like the middle paradigms, interact with each other. So this is research from 2021. I'm going to read it and move my windows around a little bit here. The quote is that researchers found that there was not one single term that can reduce all potential stigma biases. So the quote saying, we found that while some terms were very good at reducing certain types of stigma, these same terms increased other types of stigma and vice versa. So on this slide, we're talking about the idea that is addiction a medical issue or a brain disease, or is it a behavioral health issue or a social issue, right? If we break the paradigms into halves, on the medical terminology side, if we say it's a disease, we are really good at reducing stigma around saying that people with substance use disorder are not to blame and they should not be excluded. But research is showing that that does increase stigma around the idea that it increases the idea that people cannot recover because it's an issue with their brain and they're broken. And it also may increase stigma around the idea that they are dangerous if they use drugs. On the other side, using behavioral health or social issue language, so addiction is a behavioral issue or something that people are dealing with, right? That can increase stigma when it comes to saying that people who use drugs are to blame for their addiction, and that people who use drug or people with substance use disorder, not people who use drugs, people with substance use disorder should also be excluded. In this case, often incarcerated. But it does lend itself to the idea that recovery is possible and that people with substance use disorder are not dangerous because they can change. So the bottom here is that if you want to decrease stigmatizing blame, the use of medical terminology may be optimal. But if you want to increase confidence that the person can recover and is not dangerous, the use of non-medical terminology may be best. Just kind of a show here of how complicated it can be. Final slide here is just that on the slide here, you see when we talk about substance use disorder, these are the indicators according to the manual we use to diagnose. Each of the things on this slide can depend on your paradigm, how you think about it. What I know that DSM-5 or the manual we use to diagnose folks is meant to be really rigorous and like a checklist. Still, it is subject to human use, and all of us have a paradigm. Yeah, it just depends, right? All this is happening all the time. Even when we think we're being objective, we're also still subject to being human. Conclusion, I promise, is that when we increase our self-awareness here, we can have greater intentionality within a topic that is heavily stigmatized. Substance use, recovery, people who use drugs. The things that can increase our intentionality around are who do we listen to and what perspectives do we defer to? What goals do we work towards? What more do we have to learn? What conflicts can be traced to tensions between paradigms rather than making them personal, right? How does our perspective, expertise, or bias relate to our work, school, and or our community? And so again, we talked at the beginning of the year in the Leadership Academy, the theme of this program this year is unstoppable. And I found in my profession that when I got really rigid in my paradigms and I wanted everyone to just agree with me, and I thought that that was my role, I became very stoppable very quickly. I was kind of my own worst enemy in that way. But the moment I learned to dance with paradigms is the moment that kind of the rocket took off, right? And impact started happening. So just something to think about, something to consider. Again, we're always glad to have more conversations. But if you have more questions, there's my email. You all know our website. Please follow us on social media. And then if you want more Safe Campuses stuff, you all know who we are. But there's the QR code for that. Thanks, everybody.
Dylan, thank you so much for being with us here today. I feel like every time I hear this conversation or have this conversation, I learn more. And it's super interesting to hear from this year's fellows and also folks that work on campus, what questions they grapple with the most, how they see this in their work, which, friends, reminds me of a couple things that I just put in the chat. So first, y'all that have been to webinars know the drill. First is my survey. Please do let me have your data. How did you enjoy this webinar? What did you learn? How can you apply it? That sort of thing. It'll take you, I promise, less than 2 minutes. Next, there's the link to learn more about the Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy. If you're interested, you know someone next year who you want to be involved. If you want to be involved next year, if you have a spectacular student, if you're a staff member, send them that way. You can learn more also about future Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy webinars. We have 2 left this year, so be on the lookout for those and sign up at that link. Also, there's the link to Safe Project YouTube, where you have access to all of Safe Project's past webinars from this year, last year, the year prior. Go do a deep dive and learn a whole bunch. And then last but not least, questions, comments, concerns, Dylan Dunn at safeproject.us or campuses at safeproject.us. We would love to be involved. Dylan's here to answer any and all of your questions, but Safe Project is very much here to partner with you and support the work that you're already doing on your campus. Friends, thank you again for being with us here tonight, and I'm really excited to see you at the next webinar. See you next time.